Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Startup Show, brought to you, as always, by Inc. Authority. I'm your host, Trevor Rowley. Today, we're going to talk about a topic related to corporations. You know, in several of our previous episodes, we've focused a lot on LLCs, and LLCs certainly are great instruments for small business owners to begin their journey as a business. But corporations are still out there, and they're still used all of the time. And we want to talk about it a little bit today. And to help us fill in the blanks and understand corporations a little bit better, we want to introduce Casey Campbell to you. He's a member of our business startup specialist team. Hello, welcome to the program, Casey.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So first of all, somebody wants to start a brand new business. They've got this choice, right?
Right.
It's like, how am I going to set up this business? Am I going to operate as a sole proprietorship, which I think we've addressed in previous episodes, really not the best decision because it leaves a business owner open to 100% liability for anything that might happen to that business. It takes it all back on them personally. So what are the other instruments and vehicles that are available to limit one's liability? LLC is certainly a choice. We've broken those down in a previous episode. But what about a corporation? What is a corporation, first of all?
So basically, the corporation is going to be a way to set up your business that is still going to provide that protection for the company. Now, it's going to be set up a little bit different than an LLC, but it's basically just a different vehicle to protect yourself in case of any kind of liability or litigation, things like that.
Yeah, so corporations are created by law. And in the case of corporation law, one of the things that's kind of written into the law is an ability to limit the liability of the business owner who's going to use that corporation. And so if I set up a corporation, for example, for a brand new startup business that I want to begin, the limit of my liability is really to the amount that I've invested and put into that corporation. And so that's significantly advantageous compared to a sole proprietorship where I'm 100% liable for anything that might go on.
Absolutely. If you're doing the sole proprietor route, you are completely on the hook for anything bad that might happen. Whereas if you're a stockholder in a corporation, whether it's because you're forming it or because you are investing in a corporation that's already been there, you are limited on that liability. And that's really why the corporations were created, was because you have to encourage the economic growth, the businesses to be formed. If you're always on the hook for all the risk all the time, there's going to be far fewer people that are going to be able to take that risk.
And that's what it's all about, ultimately, is risk for a business owner.
Absolutely.
They're concerned about the risk they're taking on. What if there is a catastrophe? I mean, they're hoping they're not. They want to be successful, but what if something happens?
COVID number 2.
What if there's a lawsuit? What if there is a failure of the business? And how much am I on the hook for, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, legislators and governments understanding this, they said, hey, we need more people to raise their hand and say, I'm willing to start a business. I'm willing to take the risk. Not have it eliminated, but they're willing to take on some risk. But can we limit the liability, limit the risk a little bit so that more people raise their hand so that there are more businesses, more job opportunities, and more opportunities to grow the economy? And so corporate law came into existence. So corporations, they're attractive still for a number of reasons. What are some of the reasons why somebody might find a corporation attractive?
So the biggest one is going to be if you're really looking to grow and expand. There's really 2 different ways that corporations can be set up, and we'll get into that in a moment, I think. But really, if you're looking to attract investors, corporations are the way to go, because in terms of transitioning stock from one member to another, buying, selling stock, it's much, much easier than an LLC, for example. And then it's also very traditional. People know what a corporation is. Most people know they've been around for a long, long time. And there's something comforting about things that have been around and are traditional and that work.
Yeah, really, really good points, because I think that's probably the biggest thing that corporation law has going for it, particularly when you compare it to LLCs, which is another way one can limit their liability. But a corporation and the law regarding corporations has been around a long time. There's plenty of precedent. And so you can look back and see how the courts have treated corporations over time. And there is a lot of comfort and stability in knowing, what have the court said,
Absolutely.
Regarding corporations over time. In addition to that, the stock, as you talk about, certainly if I'm going to go out there and look for investors to come into the business, it's a lot easier to do with a corporation than with an LLC. An LLC, 100% interest has to be given out at all times.
Correct.
And so if you're bringing in somebody else, that means somebody's percentage is going to be lowered, to get to that 100%. Whereas, with a corporation, you don't have to issue all of the stock initially. And in fact, it's probably not a good thing to issue all of the stock.
Correct.
For example, let's say that a corporation is formed and it's got 10,000 shares of stock available in its articles of incorporation. Well, if I'm the initial formation owner of this company, I might only issue myself 1,000 shares of stock,
Right.
leaving 9,000 in the treasury of the corporation. So if you come in and want to be a partner, I can give you shares of stock, and we can work out the percentages based on the number of shares we've issued. And then in turn, you might turn and sell your stock to somebody else, and so on and so forth. So as you mentioned, that transferability of the ownership, a lot easier with a corporation.
Very much so. It's, what's make the stock market go to some extent is that ease of transfer, buying and selling, things like that. Yeah. And then bringing in investors in general. It's much easier for a corporation as opposed to an LLC. It just makes it, like I said, a lot easier.
Yeah. And we're talking about small, closely held companies, but the same principles kind of come into play as those that you would see for publicly traded companies that use corporations as their vehicle.
Correct.
Now, what about taxes? Everybody's always interested, right, in this because, whether you're successful or not successful in some degree depends upon how you pay your taxes and how you're dealing with taxes and implications associated with it. So what are some of the choices that somebody would have if they chose a corporation as the vehicle for their business?
So there's two primary options. One's not necessarily better than the other. They're just different. So there's a C Corp and an S Corp filing. So S Corp tends to be a little bit smaller. You have to have 100 people or less as far as the stockholders for the S Corp. And a lot of small businesses too tend to go that route. C Corp is what you think of like Walmart. The big brands out there are C Corps. Those tend to be the larger companies. I don't think we need to get super into the minutia on how the taxes go one way or the other, but whenever you're filing, the S Corp basically is going to have a little bit better as far as the tax breakout because it is smaller. So there might be some more motivation to go that way. Whereas a C Corp, you're going to be able to scale it a lot better. So if you're really looking to grow and get big, the C Corp might be the way to go.
So, an S corporation is a little bit more simple at tax time for a brand new business owner.
Correct.
Because the tax obligation passes through to the owners who pay the tax obligation on their own personal returns. You're only talking about personal returns where there's a little business element to it, right? An additional schedule, as opposed to a C corporation where there's actually a separate tax return paid by the corporation based on corporate income tax rates. And then if it pays individuals or if I get distributions, et cetera, as an owner, I still have to report that and pay taxes on that. Correct. So we're talking about at least two layers.
Twice, yes.
A little bit more complicated. There are other details that, somebody should talk to their tax professional about.
100%.
Help them make that decision as to whether a S corporation might be better or a C corporation. But in general, as you said, for a brand new small business owner, typically an S election is going to be better. Now, if you operate as an S election for a while, there are ways that you can go to the IRS and you can change the election. There are rules governing that. So you're not locked in forever with that election. There are limitations in how often you can switch back and forth and so forth. But you can make a change if you decide that another election might be better down the road.
100%, yes.
So, Casey, I'm starting a new business, for example. I call into Inc. Authority, who are the professionals, and I talk to you, and I decide that I want to have a corporation, or maybe I'm not exactly sure if I want to have a corporation. What are some of the things that I might want to consider, in terms of what might be attractive to me in having a corporation?
So the big thing that we end up talking to folks about when they're going down the corporation path is growth. When we're talking about scaling, not staying as, mom and pop, when you're really trying to grow, whether it be drop shipping and you're hoping to hook in with Amazon or one of the other big brands out there or something like that. Or if, you think your, big brand might grow up and become the next, whether it's a retail store, like, a boutique that you want to grow and have boutiques in every state. So the scalability of the corporations is really what most folks that we talk to, it's really why they're wanting to go that route. And then the ability to attract investors. Yeah. So if you're hoping to get, and you might already have someone in mind, you might have an angel investor that says, hey, I love your business model. I love your idea. Maybe I've known you for 10 years and I trust you and I'm going to give you whatever the figure amount is. Okay, well, let's go the corporation route. That way we can have the shares. I can set myself to have whatever amount that I want to have. They can have what I want to give them. And then we can move forward and still have some in the bank if we need to give some to other people.
Right. So well said, because, in today's day and age, we talk about limited liability companies, LLCs, all the time, and rightly so, because they're terrific vehicles for a small business owner. And sometimes we overlook still that a corporation for a particular person, it might be the better route, given on what's important to them. And if it is important to them to try and attract other investors and have easy transferability of interest, corporation might be the way to go.
Absolutely.
Maybe you think you've got an idea which is going to be the next big thing, and maybe it's going to go public someday. Well, LLCs don't go public.
Correct.
You have to have a corporation. Now, that's a long way down the road for somebody, that's just starting a new business. But if you think you've got one of these potential unicorns, possibly a corporation might be the right vehicle.
That's what Silicon Valley is built on.
Yeah. Now, if I start with a corporation, but decide that I should have had an LLC, are there ways to change that down the road? Is it easy? Is it complicated?
So there are, yes. Generally, we find that most folks that are going from LLC to corporation specifically will end up dissolving and then reforming. But if you are switching from, like we talked about briefly, an S Corp versus a C Corp, that's a lot easier. It's more along the lines of just filing paperwork. But if you do want to switch, it can be done.
Yeah, it can be done. There are some significant decisions, particularly tax implications, to changing the type of entity that you have. But again, what is good for somebody today? 10 years from now, we don't have a crystal ball. Yeah, might change. And so just letting people know that there are options, and if needs change and priorities change, those things can be looked at the appropriate time.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Casey.
Thanks for having me.
You've been very informative. It's good to know more about corporations and where they might be appropriate for a brand new business owner. It's good to contrast them and compare them with LLCs, which I think most people understand is probably the best choice for most small business owners. But there is definitely a place for corporations. Appreciate you bringing all of the knowledge to us today.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us again at this episode of The Startup Show, always brought to you by Inc. Authority. Now would be a good time, if you've enjoyed this episode, to go ahead and hit the like button. We appreciate it when you do that. And make sure that you have the notification bell turned on so that you're always aware of all the future content that comes your way. We're wishing you much success. We'll see you next time on The Startup Show. I'm Trevor Earle, your host. We'll see you.